And U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he's very much looking forward to his scheduled meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea. Trump is scheduled to meet his Chinese counterpart in the coastal city of Busan, that's about 85 kilometers south of Gyeongju, in their first face-to-face encounter since the U.S. president launched second trade war with China. Earlier, during his speech at the APEC summit, Trump said the expected trade deal would be good for both the countries and something very exciting for everybody.
President Xi of China is coming tomorrow here, and we're going to be, I hope, making a deal. I think we're going to have a deal. I think it'll be a good deal for both. And that's really a great result. You know, that's better than fighting and going through all sorts of problems.
Well, speaking on Air Force One, Trump said he expected the agreement to solve a lot of problems. Listen to this.
I know a little bit about what's going on because, you know, we have been talking to them. We're not just walking into a meeting cold, but the relationship with China is very good. So I think we're going to have a very good outcome for our country and for the world, actually. I think it's important for the world.
Now, China's foreign ministry was more cautious, saying that Xi and Trump would have in-depth talks on major issues. Trump has indicated that the agreement would include lowering 20% tariffs on Chinese goods related to fentanyl, which has killed tens of thousands of Americans. Of particular importance to Trump, with an eye on U.S. farmers, is whether China will resume purchases of American soybeans. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had said that after the run-up talks in Malaysia, that Beijing had agreed to substantial purchases. Another major issue is export controls on rare earths announced by Beijing this month that prompted Trump to call Xi's summit into question. Now, Beijing holds a virtual monopoly on these materials, which are essential for sophisticated electronic components across a range of industries. And to discuss more on this meet, our WION's correspondent, Susan Tani, is joining us live on the broadcast from New York. Susan, thank you so much for joining. Well, of course, now a big meeting to take place between Trump and Xi. If you could just give us a rundown of like what the itinerary looks like for Trump and what are the major topics that we're looking at?
Yeah, really, this is a meeting with great expectations and great anticipation. And a lot is at stake. So all of those things combined make for this meeting that the president mentioned is going to take more than 3 to 4 hours. When we look at his schedule and his itinerary, it only has about an hour and a half time between meeting Xi Jinping and then departing back for Washington, D.C. But we'll see how long these conversations are going to take. There's no shortage of topic for these two leaders to talk about. I think a lot of us are going to be looking at the outcome because President Trump generally is someone who wants tangibles out of these meetings. He wants a clear-cut answer. He wants a signed deal, a deal. And China, for the most part, has been, at least until now, you know, talking about a long-term commitment, establishing a long-term relationship. And so what does that entail? Of course, they'll be talking about tariffs. They'll be talking about rare earths. They'll be talking about the issue of farmers and the soybean, which is so important for American farmers right now. Remember, China is the largest importer of American soil from the United States and has not made these purchases since the beginning of the year because of these tariffs. So that's going to be a huge talking point. The issue of fentanyl, of course, TikTok is going to make headlines as well. But beyond that, the issue of rare earths, with which China holds a monopoly, is really something that the United States is going to be honing on. Yes, President Trump is going in with sort of a nice bargaining tactic because he's been in the region, he's made deals, but nonetheless, it doesn't take away from the monopoly that China has on these rare earths. And of course, the devil's going to be in the detail. If they're going to be talking about tariffs, then when is that going to happen? When is there going to be a reduction? If they're talking about, the purchase of soybeans, when is that going to happen? How much is it going to happen? And of course, the issue of rare earths, this monopoly that China has on it, is it going to ease these restrictions for a year? Is it going to say that we're going to eventually ease them? So all of these details are going to be very important, but I think the negotiating style of both leaders is just so prominent here. As I mentioned, President Trump wants deals, deals, deals. He wants the pen. He wants tangibles. He wants something he can hold on to. Xi Jinping, for the most part, dealing with the United States, has sort of been kicking the can down the road and making promises. So we'll see.
All right, of course. And now another thing which I'm looking at the timings that you told, there's a lot of topics and somehow little time. Do you think the South China would somehow fit in all these meetings? And it's interesting because it's taking place in South Korea. How do you look at that?
Yeah, just fascinating. The location, of course, South Korea, a big ally of the United States. They just signed a deal with the United States. So like I said, President Trump is going to feel good going into this. It's not only all of this laundry list of topics that they're going to be talking about, but the big elephant in the room that perhaps not many people are discussing is the United States wants all of these stuff and it's willing to negotiate on tariffs and whatnot. But what does China really want? And at the end of the day, what China wants is Taiwan. So is the issue of Taiwan going to be on the table? And then again, what does China and the United States both want? They want an end to Russia's war in Ukraine, China being Russia's ally. Will President Trump try to sort of use this meeting to talk to Xi Jinping, to talk to Vladimir Putin, to sort of get that peace deal going as well? So those are going to be interesting aspects as well. And of course, the issue of Indo-Pacific. But I think for China, their eyes are ultimately going to be on Taiwan, and they want to see what President Trump has to say about that.
Absolutely. Now, if you look at how Trump has been using tariffs, we do see that he's been using tariffs as a weapon, not just Southeast Asian countries, which we see right now in ASEAN, and also European countries. How do you think this tariff as a weapon works with China?
Yeah, when you talk to Trump administration officials, they say that the tariffs are working. They say that using it as a bargaining chip is working. It's easier said than done when it comes from the administration. When you talk to these countries, of course, they don't feel that way. And a lot of them have been trying to sort of get on the good side of Trump, as we saw during this trip, to sort of not be in that crossfire of this tariff war. But I think ultimately with China, the question that remains is, if there's going to be a reduction in tariffs, does the U.S. specify which tariffs are going to be paused, reduced, or left unchanged? And, this 100% tariff threat that doesn't seem to be on the table right now, well, if things don't go well, is that going to be back on the table as well? So it'll be, like I mentioned, the devil's in the detail. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not the United States is going to be able to leverage tariffs against China during these negotiations.
And if you look at all these, the presence of U.S. and China in Southeast Asia, who has, it's kind of like interesting to talk about this, but who has the leverage here? Is it China or is it U.S.? Because when we look at President Trump's stay there, it's slightly somehow shorter than Xi Jinping, who will be meeting other leaders there as well. How do you look at that?
Yeah, it just depends on what aspect of it you're looking at. Of course, the United States has a huge military presence in the Indo-Pacific, in China's backyard. It has been trying to go with a really full deck of cards and a winning hand. But again, behind closed doors, you talk to administration officials, they may boast about the tariffs and whatnot. But the issue of rare earth minerals is really a sticking point for the United States. That is something that the United States is extremely concerned about, and the monopoly that China has on those rare earth minerals. So I think that's the part where, the United States really doesn't have an upper hand and really wants to get something tangible, concrete out of China. Is it going to be able to do so? We'll have to wait and see. But it's no secret that Xi understands that is his winning card going into these negotiations. We're going to hear headlines about the fentanyl
Right.
issue. Of course, it's a very important issue here. As you know, the precursors of fentanyl travel from China to Mexico and then here in the United States. Xi Jinping has made promises before. They've tried to crack down to a certain extent. That's going to be on the agenda. We'll get headlines regarding that. The issue of the sale of TikTok and handing it over to a U.S. Buyer, that's probably going to make headlines as well. But really, those aren't as significant as the soybean issue that China has stopped purchasing from the United States, and it's hitting U.S. farmers hard, and the rare earths issue.
Absolutely, of course. There's so many issues, so little time. You'll have to wait and see how these talks go. Absolutely. So we'll get to that, and we'll have you back again to give us a total rundown of what it is there. Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us right now.